Welcome to Star Wars Comics in Canon. The Force is strong with this one.
Hello there and welcome to Star Wars Comics in Canon, your guide to the wider Star Wars canon through the comic book lens. And to take you on this journey, I'm your host, Mike Burton. And so brings another book review. So guys, continuing as the standard fashion as I'm doing on this very show, I'm just doing lots of book reviews for the High Republic. So my previous book reviews, I did The Light of the Jedi, which was out in March 13th. I did A Test of Courage, which was out August 14th. And I did Into the Dark, which was October 4th. Now all of that was 2021. Depending on where you're listening to this, if you're on YouTube, then you'll be able to find it quite easily. It's in playlists and things. There's a whole playlist on book reviews and one on the High Republic specifically, so you can find them all there. If you're listening on a podcast app on the feed of Comics in Motion, then as I said, the dates that I've just listed, March 13th, August 14th, October 4th, just look for them, or just type in Star Wars book review and then the name of the book and it will come up, because I've just checked, I'm one of the few podcasters who seem to be doing long form book reviews on all of these High Republic books. So I suppose that works in that way, but I've already got you listening. So let's do some of the background information on the Rising Storm and the High Republic and stuff, and then I can get into the review. And to clarify, as I said in my previous reviews, what I like to do is it starts off spoiler-free, I give my thoughts on it, sort of read the blurb out, talk about when it is in the timeline, some of the general themes and things that occur in the book, then I give plenty of warning, and then I go on to a slightly more spoilery description, but something that still isn't very spoilery and wouldn't be anything really past the first, say, quarter or so of the book, aside from like light details that don't necessarily impact plot. And then towards the end, once again, I'll give plenty of warning when I go into this. I'll then give a slightly more spoilery review for those people who either aren't fussed about having spoilers before they read the book, or people who aren't necessarily planning on reading the book but want sort of general ideas of what's going on in the canon around the High Republic, just so people don't have to read, every single piece of High Republic content, because, 3 books every 6 months, as well as, 2 ongoing comic series, as well as multiple mini-series. It's a lot of content to consume. Oh, and also an audio drama, which I'll tackle because that links quite nicely into this book as well. But I'm going to tackle all those things as we kind of get going and whatnot. But yeah, let's start with some of the background information, when this is set and things, and then I'll get into my spoiler-free review. And as I said, I'll give you guys plenty of warning before I go into spoiler territory. So, the book, The Rising Storm, was written by Cavan Scott. It was released June 29th, 2021, and is part of the first phase of the High Republic, but in the second wave. So what it seems to be is there's going to be 3 waves per phase, and there are going to be 3 phases of the High Republic. As a reminder, the High Republic era, the first phase of it is set about 200 years before the prequel trilogy. So timeline-wise, we do before and after the Battle of Yavin. The Battle of Yavin is when they blow up the Death Star in A New Hope, so that's generally the timescale that I use to confirm when events are happening in comparison to other events and things, and that's generally the most commonly used one outside of the Star Wars universe. Obviously in the Star Wars universe, but people wouldn't know in 230 odd years that a Death Star is going to blow up and there's going to be a Battle of Yavin. But yeah, anyway, so as I said, first phase of the High Republic is about 200 years before the Phantom Menace, so that is about 232 years before the Battle of Yavin, because Phantom Menace takes place about 32 years before the Battle of Yavin. And the first phase and the first wave are books that I've tackled in the previous book reviews I mentioned. The Light of the Jedi, A Test of Courage, and Into the Dark. Now what they do with these releases is they'll have one release day, which is normally the adult novel, which is the one with the most amount of plot information. It moves the whole story around the most. It is generally aimed at adults, as I said, but it's suitable for most audiences. I'd probably say if teenagers are quite good at higher level of reading, it's mainly because the books are like between 300 and 450 odd pages. It's a lot to take in. Some of the themes are a bit heavier and stuff, but I'd say realistically, if anyone's about 12 or 13 and older, as long as they have the reading capabilities to be able to read these books, it would probably be fine for them, but it's generally aimed at a slightly older audience. So that's sort of the main pillars of the High Republic. The first one was The Light of the Jedi. Then on the same day they released the adult novel, they released the junior novel. The junior novel of Light of the Jedi, it was A Test of Courage, and for The Rising Storm, the one that goes along with it is Race to Crash Point Tower. What it generally does is kind of lightly talks about what's going on in the main plot of the main book book, but does it with a whole story that is generally involving younger characters. The themes are a lot less dark, there's a lot less death, there's a lot less sort of adult themes regarding either drugs or sex or anything like that, which obviously aren't huge in the Star Wars universe that much, but in the High Republic it's becoming slightly more common, and there are certain things that are discussed in there, which obviously in this book I will get into later on. So the Test of Courage is the one for Light of the Jedi. For this one, it's Race to Crash Point Tower. As I said, there are events that kind of happen around or like parallel to the big pillar events. And then they're junior novels, so they're generally sort of middle school. So I think it's like 10-year-olds generally aimed at, but they're really good books as well. I've read both Race to Crash Point Tower and Test of Courage. As I said, Test of Courage, I did the book review that August 14th. That was a lot of fun. And then they release the young adult books. The young adult books are normally released about a month after the junior and the adult books are released. And then they usually take place like slightly after. So it's almost, to kind of really briefly do it, you've got the adult novel, which is the main plot. You've got the junior novel, which is like the abridged, more kid-friendly, not quite version, but kind of seeing it from a different perspective. And then the young adult novel is kind of almost like an epilogue. So it's got its own story. It's often got one or two characters that are in the main plot. And often it's, from what I've seen of the two that we've got, they either take place just at the tail end of the events of the adult novel or just after. So they're still around a few weeks, normally a couple months, within the same sort of time frame. Now, the second wave of the High Republic, so as I said, The Rising Storm, Race to Crash Point Tower, and then Out of the Shadows, those three books seem to take place approximately 6 months or so after the events of Light of the Jedi, Test of Courage, and Into the Dark. So Light of the Jedi and the sort of the first wave of the first phase, they were generally around the first interaction with the Nile properly and the Great Disaster, which was the big hyperspace event that occurred. In essence, a Nile ship. Niles travel across hyperspace and things using different ways to hyperspace. They're called paths. And basically a Nile ship caused another ship, which was like a big Republic ship, to burn out and like become destroyed while traveling in hyperspace, faster than the speed of light. And then all these little bits of this ship would fly off in different directions. They were called emergencies, and they would hit certain planets or moons or anywhere else. And obviously when something is traveling so fast and it hits something that isn't moving fast at all, it creates a huge amount of destruction. So the Light of the Jedi, the first like third of the book, is all about the Jedi dealing with like shards of this ship falling out of hyperspace, destroying things. And this is like 6 months or so after that. And the Rising Storm centers around the Republic Fair, which is something that the Chancellor at the time, Lena So, she has organised to try and, connect the galaxy together, because at the moment, the Republic is still expanding. You've got the core world, you've got like Coruscant and Corellia and places like that. I think Naboo is in the core world as well. And then as you go out further, there's less and less places that have been explored. So you've got the mid-rim, which is generally quite explored, but then the outer rim hasn't been explored as much. And the Republic is trying to expand, is trying to connect to new planets and new peoples and cultures and things to try and unify the galaxy together. And the Republic Fair is meant to be a celebration of that, and is meant to be something that connects so many different places together. And one of the key relations that are trying to be built in this book is actually with the Togrutas. Now, in the prequel era and onward, Togrutas are fairly commonplace in the galaxy, it seems. The two most famous Togrutas you guys will be aware of is Shark T, who's a Jedi Master. She's in the Clone Wars series. She helps train up some of the clones in Kamino and whatnot, and her death in Legends happened about 3 times. In the canon, she was killed by Anakin in the Jedi Temple. You can see it in canon in a flashback, or rather a Force vision that Yoda sees in the Clone Wars Series 6. So it's all very convoluted, her death. And the other, which I would say arguably more famous Togruta, is one of the best characters in all of Star Wars, and there's Ahsoka Tano. So they're the main two, and there is a character which is Jorah Mali. She was in the Light of the Jedi book, and she was the master of Reath Silas, who is in the Into the Dark book, which is my last book review, and he also appears again in the Out of the Shadows young adult book, which I will be tackling at some point soon. Jorah Mali, as I said, she was a Togruta. She was in the previous wave of the books quite a bit. But aside from her, it's not that common for Togrutas to be involved with anything else to do with the Republic. And this book kind of talks about their relations there and things. And it's a really, really interesting element, which I will go into when I go into the slightly more spoilery parts. But that's the general idea of what's happening in this book. That's the central theme of it. It's all about the High Republic Fair. And as like a brief review of this book, I would say it's as good as The Light of the Jedi. It's better and worse in slightly different ways. I would probably say that I personally enjoyed this book slightly more, but I think that maybe if they made a movie out of the books, I think the movie of The Light of the Jedi would maybe be considered better by the mainstream, which sounds quite a weird thing to say, but in essence, I think that the pacing of The Rising Storm is better for me, and the chapters are generally a bit shorter, which I really like because it makes you feel like, you're doing a lot more, and the chapters in Light of the Jedi are slightly longer. But the first third of The Light of the Jedi is so intense and so action-packed and is such masterful writing that there's not really any action that happens in any Star Wars writing I've read thus far that are quite as enthralling and as gripping, as intense as The Light of the Jedi was. Now, don't get me wrong, there's plenty of action in The Rising Storm, but it all kinds of starts to happen towards the middle and towards the end of the book, as opposed to towards the start. Now, Light of the Jedi, there's the major event in the start, then the middle is kind of the aftermath, and then the ending is kind of like another, I think the term is like a crescendo, where almost like it comes back. It's not quite as intense at the start, whereas The Rising Storm is just building and building and building and building. There is some action sequences near the start, which I will get into, but generally it's just a build up to unveiling of the Republic Fair, and then something happening at the Republic Fair. Now, I'll read you the blurb of this, and it's pretty apparent, this isn't a spoiler, that something bad happens at the Republic Fair. It's quite clean to see. This isn't just going to be a nice, 300 to 400 page book on just how the Republic Fair went on, everything was lovely and the galaxy is now united and nothing bad happened. As lovely as that would be, it probably wouldn't make for the most exciting book. I mean, people like me who are lore junkies would probably love to read that sort of thing, but I think 400 odd pages of just everyone getting along wouldn't really move the plot along of the High Republic that well, and try to establish what the High Republic is trying to show, which is how the Jedi, centuries before the prequels, how they got to the way they are at the prequels, how they became so dogmatic, how they became so set in their ways. They were very rigid, they weren't very open to changing things. And when you get characters like Rael Averross or Quinlan Vos or Qui-Gon Jinn, even ones who are trying to challenge how the Jedi Council are thinking, trying to challenge where the Republic is going, when the Clone Wars on the horizon and things and all these things occurring, those people are seen as the outliers. They're kind of seen as these people that don't connect with the rest of the Jedi sort of mindset and the order. Whereas you go to the High Republic era, and there's so many more individuals who match people such as Qui-Gon or Quinlan Vos, who are seen maybe as slightly more of mavericks, or maybe not quite the word extreme, but very different. They are far more commonplace in the High Republic, and the whole point of these phases and waves of the High Republic is trying to show how the Jedi changed over the centuries. So it's a very interesting way to see all these things. But I also want to add that with The Rising Storm, online on Wikipedia, it says that it's 336 pages long, but I've got a copy of it right there. That was me slapping the book, just in case you guys didn't believe that I had it. And it's 427 pages. So I don't know if in America you guys have bigger books or with smaller font or what it is, but obviously I'm based in the UK. I've got a UK book, and Cavan Scott's actually one of the only, I think he's the only Project Luminous writer who's actually based in the UK. I think all the other ones are US based, but it's still quite a lot of pages to read. There's a lot of information going on. There's huge amounts of lore. There's a lot of storylines going on at once, and it's absolutely ace. And as I said, I think I generally did prefer The Rising Storm because it focused on the character Elzar Mann, and I just think him as a character and his journey is so intriguing. In Light of the Jedi, it kind of centered around Bel Zettifar, Port Ingle, Loden Greatstorm, Avar Kriss, some of those characters. And Elzar Mann and Stellan Gios were in it as well, but they were more sort of secondary or even tertiary characters, whereas in this they are brought to the forefront. Now, Bel Zettifar's still in it quite a lot, but you've also got other characters like Ty Yorick comes to the front, Lena So, the Chancellor at the time, she's in it quite a lot, but you do get a lot more Nihil perspective. Now, obviously the Nihil are the antagonists, so you get for the first third of the book, you get this whole journey that the eye of the Nihil, which is basically the boss of them all, Marchion Ro, he goes on this really interesting journey as well, which when I get into the more spoiler stuff, I'll talk about that too. But obviously with Light of the Jedi, that was an introduction to the High Republic era, to the ways of the Jedi, all of their ships, how they have their lightsabers, how they look, their general mindset, what's going on with them at the time, what the Republic's trying to do, all these sorts of layers and things. So it has to really set the groundwork a huge, huge amount. But obviously The Rising Storm is something that is already been established. There are new characters or characters that have more flashing out and things, but the general world that you're in, you're already aware of that. So there doesn't have to be so much time spent trying to establish these things. And that's what happens quite a lot, I find, with a lot of movies and things. When you've got a movie which they plan the sequel, when you've got either source material already existing or things where they're like, oh, we're going to make a trilogy, so we know the next story is going to be like this, you don't need to spend as much time establishing things. And often sequels of films. I mean, Empire Strikes Back is a good example, even though I'm in the camp that does not believe that George Lucas had the trilogy planned when he made A New Hope, obviously at the time just called Star Wars. Obviously, his great ideas worked when he made Empire Strikes Back and Return of the Jedi, but I do not believe that was his plan from the start. Obviously, the Luke and Leia stuff and a few other slight inconsistencies kind of hint to that. But regardless, when they made the sequel, Empire Strikes Back is a very different film in theme, thematically, and how it feels to the way that the original Star Wars was. And I think that The Rising Storm mirrors that quite a lot. The Rising Storm is much more of a darker book. It is much more interpersonal, I think, where the world has already been established. You can get into the details of it, because obviously in Star Wars they were trying to establish the Force and the Jedi and what all these kind of things were. In The Empire Strikes Back, you're already kind of aware of those things, but you don't have the intricate details, which is where Yoda's scenes on Dagobah with Luke adds so much weight to the Force and the understanding of the Jedi. And I think that The Rising Storm in certain parallels does that to the High Republic Jedi. There's some quite cool and interesting kind of powers that are in it. Powers may be the wrong word, but the way the Force is used, there's more Force-sensitive beings in this, one in particular that I will tackle a little bit later. So it's just a book which, this is The Empire Strikes Back to A New Hope, which is The Rising Storm to Light of the Jedi. I think they're probably both equally good. It just kind of depends if you are more into the world building or if you're more into getting more details on a pre-established world. That's kind of a really quick layman's terms way of explaining the differences. But as I said, I absolutely loved this book. I absolutely love Light of the Jedi. If you read Light of the Jedi and you enjoyed it, or you listened to the audiobook version or whatever, I can almost guarantee that you will enjoy this book as well. It is just an incredible read, and I stand by that this book and The Light of the Jedi are the two best High Republic books. Well, actually, they're the two best books, I think, that have been written for Star Wars in the new canon. I haven't read a huge amount of Legends material. I know bits and pieces and things, and I played a lot of the games and etc. But just speaking about the canon, although I love a lot of the books that I've read, I've read all the Claudia Gray books, obviously one of them being Into the Dark, which is a High Republic book, and reading, the Certain Point of View, the Aftermath trilogy, Ahsoka, and a few other bits and pieces here and there. I think that these High Republic books are absolutely incredible because they are telling their own story. They are pushing forward their own narrative. And the Aftermath trilogy, I think, does that as well. I don't think the writing's quite as good, and I think it doesn't grip you in the same way, although they are excellent books and I thoroughly enjoy them. And then you've got other books, like Master and Apprentice, which is about Qui-Gon and Obi-Wan. And although that's got its own story and a lot of its own characters, that is building off the relationship you are already aware of in The Phantom Menace and the characters you already know about. Whereas that's what happens a lot of the time in this canon, where you've got books, you've got Tarkin, you've got Rogue One, the Catalyst, you've got Guardians of the Whills, you've got Ahsoka. There's all these books and things which are basically pre-existing characters you already know about and giving them more depth and information, or certain events that already exist and adding to those, trying to build off pre-existing content, which is 9 times out of 10, it is the films. Whereas the High Republic is standing its own 2 feet. It's not relying on a movie to try and establish plot. The books are what is establishing the plot. So it's a very different challenge, and they are different. The books are read in different ways because, the High Republic, you've got the one audio drama, Tempest Runner, and then you've got several comics and books, and that's the project. Aside from the VR game, which is like 1 or 2 missions where the character goes with Yoda to like an old temple and stuff, which is cool from what I've seen about it, but it's not like, very plot heavy. It doesn't establish much about the High Republic, what's going on at that time. It's kind of like a nice little add-on sort of thing. And the High Republic books, they just do such an excellent job at really pushing the plot. So if you like plot-heavy Star Wars, you really like characters and stuff, although the action scenes are really, really cool, that's the kind of thing that you would expect in The Rising Storm and Light of the Jedi. And as I said, to compare them both, they're probably both equally good books, but me personally, I did enjoy The Rising Storm more, if only because I found it slightly easier to digest due to already knowing about the established characters and things, but also, as I said slightly earlier, I love the fact that the chapters are really short. I think Molly of Star Wars Explained mentions this, and she said that she likes the fact in the same way that you read them and it just feels like you're accomplishing a lot. Whereas like with the Charles Soule book, like the Jedi, it was excellent, but you'd have one chapter that was like 20 plus pages, but every 2 or 3 pages it would change to what another character was doing in a similar area. Whereas Cavan Scott generally seems to change chapter when it changes the character's perspective, unless it's from one character doing something and then a character next to them then shows what they're doing, if you know what I'm kind of saying. So I generally prefer that style. I think the whole Republic Fair and everything that goes along with that is very interesting. I would say that aside from one main aspect, which is it's an unavoidable aspect, and it's something that one has to definitely consider when you review this whole book. I can't say what it is because it's quite a big plot spoiler. So if you're desperate to know what I'm kind of alluding to and you haven't read the book, then I will talk about it right at the very end. The only hint I'll give you is the leveler. That's all I'm going to say for now. But the stuff involving that, unpredictable, very clever, very, very interesting, and it, touches certain horror elements, which Cavan Scott is very, very good at doing. Whereas the rest of the plot, it's all about the High Republic Fair. Something bad is going to happen at the High Republic Fair. It's just kind of this thing where it's quite tense because you can kind of feel it coming. It's almost in a similar vein to the prequels in some manner. Obviously, when Revenge of the Sith came out, no one necessarily knew that. Obviously, everyone knew that Anakin was going to become Darth Vader, and everyone suspected or knew that Ian McDiarmid's character, Palpatine, he was the Emperor. It's fairly obvious in that regard. But you didn't necessarily see Order 66 happening. You didn't necessarily see Anakin killing younglings in a Jedi temple. There's those sort of things. So although you had this anticipation of Anakin turning to Vader, you didn't know exactly how that was going to go. And it's kind of like with this in The Rising Storm. Something bad's clearly going to happen with the Republic Fair. You can tell it's going to be the Nile, but you don't know exactly how or why or when specifically it's going to occur. So in that realm of things, it is ever so slightly more predictable. And some people may like that because they might like the intensity of being like, oh, when's this going to happen? I'm looking forward to it. Compared to Light of the Jedi was just like, look, there's a big disaster that happens. That's all you know. And it's to do with hyperspace. And aside from that, we didn't know any information. So Light of the Jedi was much more going into this completely new realm, not knowing what was going on. Whereas The Rising Storm is kind of like this time bomb about to go off. And then you're just like, well, when the time bomb goes off, what's going to happen to this character? What's going to happen to this character? And in The Light of the Jedi, there is a character called Loden Greatstorm, who was one of the best characters in the book, I'd say. He's a Twi'lek, I think he's Jedi Master. He was training up Bel Zettifar, who's another excellent character. And at the end of Light of the Jedi, Loden Greatstorm gets captured by the Nile, and that's more or less all you know. You do get more information on him in this book, but once again, I will delve into that as I kind of go forward. But the connections to The Light of the Jedi are absolutely incredible. You can enjoy the main adult books, Light of the Jedi and The Rising Storm, without having to read the junior novels or the young adult novels, but obviously it all works together very well. I'd say the junior novels are probably the least important elements to have to read to really get a big grip on the High Republic, but the young adult books, like Into the Dark, the review I did, a month or so ago, that was all central around the Drengir, who are secondary antagonists in these first few waves of Phase 1 of the High Republic, but they are much more of a presence in the comics themselves, and that all kind of gets discussed somewhat here as well. Whereas, as of recording this, I have not yet finished Out of the Shadows by Justina Ireland. It's a young adult novel. I'm trying to not read all the books and then do a book review on all three, because it gets a little bit confusing. I'm trying to make sure that I at least do some of this book review for The Rising Storm, because I've already read this and Race to Crash Point Tower, and then I'm in the midst of reading Out of the Shadows, but I'm trying to make sure that I don't overread everything, because what I don't want to do is, finish all three books and then start doing the book review for The Rising Storm and either forget details that are specific about this book and then kind of ramble on and stuff. So I'm trying to avoid doing that somewhat. So if there are any details in this that I talk about that are in Out of the Shadows and you guys have read them and I haven't connected the dots, I'm just telling you now that is the reason why. So that is my general thoughts on this spoiler-free. What I'm going to do is I'm going to read the blurb to you guys and then give probably a little bit more information on some of the characters, and then I'll, give a warning and I'll say now I'm going to go into slightly more spoiler territory, what I can talk about the plot and certain more details with the characters that occur maybe within the first quarter or third of the book, so things still don't get fully spoiled. So let's read the blurb. I also just want to add in here that my copy of The Rising Storm is signed by Cavan Scott. I just want to do that little braggy thing here because I'm very happy about it and it makes me very happy. And it's one of 1,000 that are signed, and it's number 606, if anyone is even vaguely interested. But yes, I just want to say that because it makes me very happy I've got that. Because a lot of us in the UK can't get all the cool covers that a lot of you American listeners can get. I think it was a Target one, which was a really, really cool design that went all the way around the book, the front and the back, and you could buy it with a tote bag and stuff as well with the artwork on it, and it was amazing. And then there's another place that also did an alternate version of the book cover. Here in the UK, there's not really any alternate covers, which is a bit sad, but I could get it signed by Cavan Scott, so that's what I did. Anyway, let's read the blurb of this book. Following the dramatic events of Light of the Jedi, the heroes of the High Republic era return to face a shattered peace and a fearsome foe. In the wake of the hyperspace disaster and the heroism of the Jedi, the Republic continues to grow, bringing more worlds together under a single unified banner. Under the leadership of Chancellor Lina So, the spirit of unity extends throughout the galaxy, with the Jedi and the newly established Starlight Beacon stationed at the vanguard. In celebration, the Chancellor plans the Republic Fair, a showcase of the possibilities and the peace of the expanding Republic, a peace the Jedi hope to foster. Stellan Gios, Bel Zettifar, Elzar Mann, and others join the event as ambassadors of harmony, but as the eyes of the galaxy turn towards the fair, so too does the fury of the Nile. Their leader, Marchion Ro, is intent on destroying this unity. His storm descends on the pageantry and celebration, sowing chaos and extracting revenge. As the Jedi struggle to curb the carnage of the rampaging Nile, they come face to face with the true fear their enemy plans to unleash across the galaxy, the kind of fear from which even the Force cannot shield them. So there you go, as you could hear by the blurb, it basically says the Nile are going to attack the Republic Fair. So it's not really a spoiler, me kind of alluding to those things. But as I said, that's how you can kind of tell where the plot's going, and you're just sort of reading the book at like, when are the Nile going to attack? And I'll get into that a little bit later. That'll be more so for the kind of final part of this review, the more spoilerific one. But as I said, Avar Kriss isn't mentioned in that because although she was a main character in The Light of the Jedi, at the point of this book coming out in the timeline, Avar Kriss is off fighting the Drengir. So that is in the first and second volumes of the High Republic comics, which are also written by Cavan Scott. So like kudos to Cavan Scott. I know all the Project Luminous writers, which is the name of the 5 people who organised and went through and did the High Republic, which is Daniel Jose Older, Justina Ireland, Claudia Gray, Charles Soule, and Cavan Scott. There was also a gentleman called Michael something that helped them kind of orchestrate that, and then also there's a guy called George something or other who is also now writing some of the content for the High Republic as well. But those were the main 5 people. It was called Project Luminous when it was announced ages ago, before we knew it was the High Republic era or anything like that. But Cavan Scott, like, writing basically these 2 parallel stories of one is in comic form about what Avar Kriss is doing while the High Republic Fair stuff is getting sorted and how the Drengir are being handled and things, while simultaneously having this book. It melts the brain. All the Project Luminous writers are very clever being able to do what they do here. But as I said, Avar Kriss isn't really in it. Elzar Mann and Stellan Gios, they're the main characters in this on one element of it. You've got Bel Zettifar, who has got a new master because obviously Loden Greatstorm was captured and they don't know what's going on with him. So it's his master Indira Stokes. Then you've got Ty Yorick, who's a saber for hire. And for clarity, on the cover of the book, of the standard edition of the book, you see 3 Jedi standing there, or seemingly Jedi. There's 3 people with ignited lightsabers. You've got a man standing at the front with a blue lightsaber. I believe that is Stellan Gios. And then there's a younger human standing next to him with a green lightsaber. That is Bel Zettifar. And then there's a Tholothian to the left of them, which is Ty Yorick. She's got a purple lightsaber. So yeah, that's generally my thoughts on the book and the spoiler-free sort of view on things. And now I'm going to get into light spoiler territory, talking a little bit more about the plot and the themes and some information about the characters as well. And then from there, I'll then give you guys plenty of warning before I get into the more major spoiler territory. So I thought a good place to start the light spoiler review would be, obviously I'm going to talk about the first third or so of the book to a degree. I'm not going to go to major details, but I just want to read out the crawl. As any fans of Star Wars comics and canon knows, I love reading out the crawl for comics and things alike, and there is a crawl in this. So here it is. The galaxy celebrates. With the dark days of the hyperspace disaster behind them, Chancellor Lina So pushes ahead with the latest of her great works. The Republic Fair will be her finest hour, a celebration of peace, unity, and hope on the frontier world of Valo. But an insatiable horror appears on the horizon. One by one, planets fall as the carnivorous Drengir consume all life in their path. As Jedi Master Avar Kriss leads the battle against this terror, Nile forces gather in secret for the next stage of Marchion Ro's diabolical plan. Only the noble Jedi Knights stand in Ro's way, but even the protectors of light and life are not prepared for the terrible darkness that lies ahead. So it starts with a prologue, and it talks about Elzar Mann because he's been having these visions about the Republic Fair, which he kind of had towards the end of Light of the Jedi, but we didn't explicitly know it was about the Republic Fair, from my knowledge, from what I can recall. So it talks about that and how he kind of deals with that, and here's some meditation and things like that. It's quite interesting as a little prologue. And then the first chapter is actually from the perspective of the Nile. Now you've got, as I mentioned in that crawl, you've got Marchion Ro. He is the eye of the Nile, so he's basically their leaders. And then there are 3 Tempest Runners, who are the main people who are like in leads of each of their storms and stuff. So it's the one main leader and then the 3 sort of subordinates. He used to be more balanced, but as Light of the Jedi shows, he is, Marchion Ro, this is kind of getting more and more power in a way and has a lot more control over the Tempest Runners. Now in this one, there is one different Tempest Runner because one of them was killed in the previous book. So you've still got Pan Eater, he is a Dorwatin. You've got Lorna D, who is a Twi'lek, and then you've got someone called Zetar, who is a Talpini, who is wearing a power suit. Now a Talpini is a fairly new species in Star Wars. I think it's only in the canon. The first one I remember seeing was actually in Rogue One. You've got one of Warwick Davis's characters. I think he plays like 3 characters in Rogue One. But in the main sort of square of Jeddah City, when Cassian and Kato-So and Jin go there and then, meet the Guardians of the Wills, and then the fight breaks out between Saw Gerrera's partisans and the Empire. There is a Talpini there. He's basically like he's Warwick Davis's height, so very short, a couple foot high, and he has quite a big mouth. He's kind of like furry. Kind of imagine almost like a partly shaved Ewok with like a shaven face almost, with a really, really big mouth that is, like very, very short. That's kind of what they are. It is kind of hard to explain, but if you remember the part, you'd remember he's kind of sat behind cover and he kind of yells something. But Talpinis are slowly showing up elsewhere. But obviously the name Talpini, Eni, it kind of gives a hint that they're quite small statured beings. But this one is in a power suit, Zetar. So, when up against people who are quite formidable, including Pan Eater, who's a Dorwatin, who's obviously a massive hulking beast, then the power suit kind of gives him a bit of an edge. So quite like that sort of element of things. I like that the Tempest Runners, they're kind of unsure of Ro, what his intentions are and things. But the first few chapters are actually him traveling with a character called Udi Dis, who's quite an interesting character. Really, really interesting hearing from their perspective on a lot of these chapters. And they are a Talortai. Now, Talortai were in Legends. They're essentially bird people. So they're all feathered, they've got wings and things and beaks and etc. The species in general are actually quite force sensitive. And what's quite intriguing is that you find out that Ro is going to try and find something. So you don't find out towards the end, and I won't spoil it here. I may say it right at the very end of this whole thing, but he's just trying to find something, Marchion Ro, and you don't know what it is, you don't even know what it does, and even at the end of the book, you're not fully sure, but that's a very interesting look. I really like it when you get from the perspective of the villains and also the heroes, or the antagonists and the protagonists, however you want to put it, but obviously, that was similar in Light of the Jedi, but you didn't really get the Nile perspective towards more so the end. But in this one, from the start, you get it straight away. So I really like that element of things. And it's, even though these books are set 200 years before the prequels and things, and they're like the earliest in the canon that's been explicitly confirmed, apart from like the odd sentence about old Sith and things like that, like actual weighted story around elements of things. It is cool hearing sort of certain new creatures or species either being brought in from Legends or being created for this, who will then start to show up in the air quotes, in like the Skywalker era of the canon. So I like that element of it. And then what other parts of this have we got? So as I said, there are quite a few characters I mentioned. I think I mentioned quite a few Jedi in the spoiler-free section. So you've still got Chancellor Lina So, who was mentioned in The Crawl. She's, still trying her best to make the Republic such a place of unity and to connect all these different planets and things. And her son is actually in this one as well, who is called Kitrep. So it's interesting seeing how she and her son kind of interact about things. Obviously, the son didn't necessarily want to be famous, but because Lena is famous, obviously her son is also. So that's quite an interesting element. You've then got this journalist character called Real Dario, or Real Dairo. I may be mispronouncing, apologies. But they're basically a journalist, and they have this special implant that connects to their camera droid, and they kind of ask certain questions that like the public would be wanting to ask people who are heavily involved with the Republic Fair, because the first sort of half of the book or so is just about, preparing for the Republic Fair, everyone kind of talking about whether or not the Nile are going to attack, what they've put into place, what they haven't put into place, some of the people who think that they should have put more in place, that sort of thing, just kind of deliberations and whatnot, while also, how the Jedi are handling things. There's a few characters like Ty Yorick you get a bit more information on before she gets more involved in the story, and then obviously you've got that sort of Nile story going on as well of Marchion Ro trying to find something. So that's another interesting character, Real Dairo. You've then got someone called Samira Ka'un, who is the coordinator on Valo. They're friends with Elzar Mann, so they kind of walk around talking, kind of sorting out things as well. And then you've got quite a few other characters. As I said, I think Elzar Mann is probably my favourite in this book so far. I do really like Ty Yorick, but I think one of the reasons I'm drawn to Ty Yorick is she's kind of classed as a saber for hire. There's a mini-series coming out called Monster on Temple Peak. At the moment, I've got the second issue. I think there's going to be 4. And that shows kind of like her backstory in certain ways. And in this, when you get introduced to her, within the first chapter or 2 of being introduced, you find out that she kind of used to be a Jedi and she left and you don't know why. You don't know what the circumstances are really. she just used to be one, she's not really one anymore, but she still has a lightsaber, which is, from my understanding, or at least what we've seen in things like Clone Wars and certain other elements in the Skywalker sort of era, when a Jedi leaves the Order, usually they have to give back their lightsaber and stuff. So we don't know if she just hid her lightsaber and just disappeared one day, if she was kicked out of the Order. We really don't know what's happened to her. As I said, the Monster on Temple Peak mini-series by, I think, IDW, that's going to sort of go into a bit more detail. But I really like her as a character because she is quite morally grey in a sense. She's generally like somewhat a bodyguard, but she's primarily like a monster hunter. So she will not necessarily always try and kill things, she'll try and like use her special abilities to be able to incapacitate them, those sorts of things. And because she isn't constricted by, the dogmatic views of the Jedi, which I think is a quote from Palpatine in, the prequels, that she isn't as restricted in what she does. And when she eventually comes into contact with some of the Jedi who are a bit more dogmatic, who are obviously entrenched in the Order, it is interesting having that kind of dynamic, because it's one of those things like nothing makes you question your own beliefs as much as someone who was in the exact same position as you who then left. There's certain elements, for example, if we use religion in modern day as an example, I'm not going to delve into a huge religious discussion. I'm not saying religion is necessarily right or wrong or anything. I'm just saying, like, often if you are, say, a Christian who is heavily into their beliefs, and you have lots of atheists telling you that you're wrong or that this element's wrong or anything like that, you're not necessarily always going to get your mind changed. But if someone who you're close with, or someone who you know potentially who was a Christian and then abandoned the faith, that might be something that's a bit more intriguing to you, because obviously you can connect with them and be like, oh, you were in the same position as me, what made you change? Rather than, for example, someone who is never in that position, it's kind of easier to dismiss their point of view in a sense where you didn't know what I was doing. So I like her dynamic with another sort of character, which I'll get into, as I said, in the more spoilery review. And then Eldar Man is someone who I find very intriguing because I really like complex characters. I don't like characters who are unshakable in their, in anything they do. You've got characters who, like Yoda is a very cool character. Let's be honest, he's very unique, he's very old, he's very wise, there's lots of cool elements to him. But there's never a time where you're watching Yoda and thinking, oh, is he going to fall to the dark side? Is he going to leave the Order? Is something negative going to happen? When we're all introduced to him in the original trilogy, he's already on his deathbed. So, obviously, in Empire Strikes Back, not quite on his deathbed, but then, Return of the Jedi, you literally see him die, which is like a year later. And when you see him in the prequels, you know that he's going to die in the original. So he's only 30 odd years away from dying anyway. So with Yoda, it kind of, in some elements, has what I call almost Superman syndrome, which is the sort of unshakable goodness, which works really well for certain characters. And in a lot of stories like this, you do need characters like that. I want to clarify, Yoda isn't really in The Rising Storm at all. But when you have a character who is struggling with it, for me personally, I find that a lot more intriguing. I find it much more human in a lot of ways. Now, I know Yoda's not human, and I know a lot of characters in this aren't, human in that way. But obviously, with our understanding of people, it's just like the depth of things aren't that easy. You can't be a good person 100% of your life all the time. You can only really try your best. Depending on how much effort you put in will depend on, what the outcome is. But, I generally try to be a good person all the time. Does that mean sometimes I get angry and yell at people, or I say things that I maybe regret or that are a bit mean? Of course it does, because I'm a person. And that is, to me, when you see a character who's like that, who's struggling with these things, to me that's more interesting. It's kind of like what I found with Kylo Ren. I know he's kind of the reverse in a lot of ways, and there's many issues with the sequel trilogy, and especially the Rise of Skywalker, how they treated Ren. But he, as a character, intrigued me more because you don't know where he's going to go, and you can kind of, in certain elements, see his perspective. That kind of pull to be, being bad gets you certain results, but being good is more difficult, and all that sort of layers. So Eldar Man, without delving into it, he doesn't necessarily have the same struggles that Kylo Ren does, but as the book goes on, you can see that his connection to the Force isn't wavering, that'd be the wrong way of putting it, but sort of like he starts to get more into the middle as opposed to solely being in the light, if you know what I'm kind of trying to say. So that's a really, really interesting element that I also really enjoyed as well. And then there's another part of this, which is the relations with the Togrutas. I think I mentioned them in the spoiler-free review element. I like that. I like politics in Star Wars to a degree. I think most people can agree that the politics in Phantom Menace not only was a bit too much, but also just wasn't that interesting and wasn't really that clear. It just kind of went on in the wrong ways. Whereas when you get the politics of certain other elements of Star Wars, when it's done right, it can be really, really interesting. Like the Claudia Gray book, Bloodline. That is an excellent example of how you can have a story which is very political without it feeling like it's being dragged by politics all the time. And that's what I feel about this, is that, we're trying to understand where the Republic was years or centuries before the prequel era and how it got transformed in a way that allowed Palpatine to take advantage of it. And at the moment, it's still in kind of the youth of the High Republic in a way. So we don't know precisely how long the Republic in its current state has been established for. Obviously, what I presume what Disney and Lucasfilm are going to do over the next few probably decades is, after the High Republic's finished, we're coming to the end of the first phase in January 2022, and then there'll be probably another 3 waves of the second phase, and etc. So we're probably going to get 9 waves in total. By the end of the High Republic in a few years' time, when we're at the final phase in the final wave, I believe it's probably going to connect somewhat to the prequel era. People don't know if it's going to go like right up to it or if it's going to stop around 50 years beforehand. There's the series The Acolyte, which is coming out. I think that's due for release 2023, I think. But that's going to be set around 50 years before the prequel trilogy. So that is from where we are now in the High Republic, about 150 to like 170-ish years. So yeah, obviously the High Republic's like 200 years before the Phantom Menace and things. So, 50 years from that is 150. So yeah, 150 odd years after this sort of era, 50 years before the Phantom Menace. We don't know if the Acolyte is going to be sort of, is the High Republic going to end around the era of the Acolyte, and then the Acolyte's going to be the bridging the gap between the High Republic and the Republic we know from the prequels? We're not entirely sure, but one thing I do think is that, if not before, I wouldn't be surprised if Disney, Lucasfilm do something before this, but once the High Republic era is kind of finished, they'll do another jump back by 2, 3, 4, 500 years. Because as I've said before, like 1,000 years before the prequels is the last time that Jedi saw Sith. So about 100 years before Yoda was born. So they are inevitably going to go back. There's tons of Legends content. One of the big criticisms of the Disney recanonization of things was that Legends had such a huge amount of history and intrigue around the Jedi Wars, or the Jedi and the Sith Wars, and how the Old Republic was. And obviously there's the Knights of the Old Republic games and things that are held in such high regard. So I presume they're going to go back to those at some point, and we'll kind of see what that is. But at present, it's like the Republic itself has had calm for a while. The core worlds have been sorted, things are improving, and now the Chancellor wants to expand that. She wants to share resources with planets that need it to try and, stifle out crime where you can, and just try and make everyone's life and quality of life as high and as good as possible. So I like the element of that. I like the point of the Republic Fair and what Lena So is trying to do with it, and that she's trying to connect everyone. And then when you kind of see what happens after the Nihil attack, because as I said, it's not a spoiler to say the Nihil are going to attack. It basically says it in the crawl and the blurb. So I think you guys have a fair understanding that that's what's going to happen now. And when that all eventually does happen, it is very interesting to see that. And where I'm reading, Out of the Shadows at the moment, which is set a little while after the events of this book, it's interesting seeing some of the aftermath as well and how that's going to kind of affect the galaxy. So it's really, really interesting. I like the political element of it. I like some of the themes with it, where you've got people struggling with stuff. You've got, Ty Yorick, she's struggling with her connection to the Jedi or lack thereof. And then you've got Elzar Mann, who's kind of struggling with him dealing with the light side of the Force and things. You've got Stellan Gios, who is a recent Jedi Council member, and he's trying to keep order at the Republic Fair. And it's him trying to, balance between trying to do what the Jedi Order kind of, what's best for the Jedi Order and what the Council are asking of you, but also what you kind of feel is a better thing to do. And because Stellan Gios is so close to both Avar Kriss and Elzar Mann, there's another kind of layer to that of, friendship and kinship, and like how much faith you give into your friends, how many things you potentially don't tell certain people to help others. It's like one of those things. It sounds like a silly example, but it's almost like, especially when you're a bit younger and you're with your mate, and then your mate accidentally breaks something of their parents or gets a stain in the rug or does something that if their parents found out, they would get into trouble. So you take the decision to support your friend and not tell whoever's parents or whatever. You will then defend your friend, which, although it is not necessarily the correct moral thing to do, from your perspective at that time, it probably seems like the best thing to do, because regardless of where the fault lies, realise the problem has already occurred, and is it worth your friend getting into trouble for these things, even though that wouldn't solve anything, it just adds to the misery of something. Do you know what I'm kind of saying? It's that sort of feel. So Stellan Gios is kind of almost stuck between a rock and a hard place at certain parts of this, and I really like that element of his character, even though I think Elzar Mann is a more interesting character. So then you've got Bell Zettifar that I mentioned in the spoiler-free part, which is he's got a new master, Indira Stokes. Now, this is based less than a year after Light of the Jedi. I think I said that earlier on. I might have said 6 months, so apologies if that has led to any confusion. But this is approximately 231 years before the Battle of Yavin. So it's 199 years before the Phantom Menace. And where Bell was with Loden Greatstorm, and then Greatstorm said, you could become a Jedi Knight and things, and then Loden got captured by the Nile, and you get some more information about him in this book as well. There are some chapters where he is featured in it, so you do get some degree of closure with that element. But Bell he's doing well with his new master, Indira Stokes, but he's still kind of not necessarily committing fully, because he's still got that hope for Loden. He's still got that kind of connection to his old master, and it's him kind of struggling and thinking, when you've got it's a new father figure or Indira is a female, so it's like a new guardian, a new parental figure in some ways. And I think that connects a lot with if your parents split up, or if one of your parents passes away, or something like that, generally with parents, and then a stepdad or stepmom comes in, and they can be perfectly nice, they can be genuinely a really good person. And although you can eventually develop a connection with them, initially there's that resistance, because you still feel loyalty, or you have the feelings towards the person who's before them. And even if it's not their fault that this other person's gone, you still can't always connect with them. So I think that element of what Bell's kind of going through, because he's still a Padawan and he's like a teenager. I think he's in the upper ends of teenagers. I can't remember exactly how old he is, but I think he's like 18, 19-ish. I have just checked online. Bell was born 250 years before the Battle of Yavin. So at this point, he is, 19-ish. So yeah, he is about 18, 19 across these two books. So he is, I think Obi-Wan in the prequels, I think he became a Jedi Knight at the age of 25 after fighting Maul. I think that's how old he was in Phantom Menace. So certain Padawans, it's slightly younger, certain ones older. Obviously there's Vanestra Rowe, who I've spoken about, who is heavily in the Attest to Courage book from the first wave, junior novel, and then she's in the young adult novel Out of the Shadows by Justine Ireland, which I'm reading at the moment, and I will be tackling. There's the next book review is the Race to Crashpoint Tower, and then the one after that will be Out of the Shadows. And I think she was 15 or 16 when she became a Jedi Knight. So it depends. She is a exceptional case, but Bell is kind of getting to that point where he needs to start thinking about becoming a fully fledged Jedi, but he's still kind of holding out for Loden Greatstorm, and hasn't quite let go of that, because he always said that he wanted Loden to be there at his ceremony when you become a fully fledged Jedi. He's still kind of holding on to that, even though he doesn't know if Loden's even alive. So you've got that kind of level of things, which is very interesting, trying to move on in certain ways without being certain. I quite like that element of things. You got Chancellor So, which, as I said, she's struggling in a sense of, she doesn't seem like she's struggling when she's surrounded by people, but you get a moment or two when she's kind of by herself and certain things happen, and she feels like she's to blame for certain things by not listening to this advice or that advice. So quite like that. And there are plenty of other sort of interesting supporting characters. There's a Jedi called, I think it's Oberlin, who is I think the consistency is like a jelly almost, like a gelatinous blob thing, and they wear a suit to kind of keep them in a humanoid form somewhat. And they're a very interesting character. I quite like seeing that. And, the Republic Fair, the way this book is written, it's got some really, really good imagery. There's these floating islands and stuff. There's a zoo that have got some crazy creatures in there. There's lots of cool things. While I was reading it, I could really easily visualize being in this kind of fair area. So, kudos to Cavan Scott for that excellent writing there. But this is the general idea of the sort of plot. That's kind of some of the things I took out from it, some of the themes and whatnot, once again, without really spoiling what happens in it. But I also wanted to add in here, before moving on to the slightly more spoilerific review, if that's even the correct wording. I think I've said it before, but I don't think it makes sense. But still, there's just a few other sort of things which I want to mention here before going into slightly more spoiler territory, and I think I will be somewhat spoiling the book to a degree, but I won't. You've got a few minutes yet before I get to that. I just want to tackle some of the things that are kind of connecting to this, just in case you guys are listening to this and then you're going to stop when it gets to the proper spoiler stuff so you can go read the book. I want to tell you guys what else is coming out that you can kind of sink your teeth into. So as I said, there was The Monster of Temple Peak, which is about Ty Yorick. Then there's a series called Trail of Shadows, which is part of the High Republic stuff. It's going to be like a noir kind of thing, is what Daniel Jose Older, he's the writer, he said it's kind of like a noir thriller sort of thing. I think it's like a murder mystery. I think someone dies in like the first issue and then they're trying to figure out who did it. I've got the first issue on my bedside table ready to read, but I normally don't get to read those things till after I've done an episode of Star Wars Comics in Canon, just to make sure I don't get, wrapped up in all my new reading and then don't do the podcast reading. So that's another part. There's the Marchion Ro, which is going to be called The Eye of the Storm. I think it's going to be like a origin story for Marchion Ro, going into his life and things. I think there's going to be 2 issues for that. So it is technically a mini series, but really it's like a 2-shot almost. So that's going to be coming out, I think, in January time. I think it's going to be released around the time that the next phase of books are going to be released. And then there's also a book which, forgive me if I pronounce this wrong, but I think it's Halcyon Legacy. So it's Halcyon. And it's going to be starring Buryaga, who was the Wookiee Padawan. And it connects in with the Galactic Star Cruiser, which is the very expensive Disney tour thing, which I think you get on I think it's just like a boat cruise almost, but everything is like completely Star Wars themed. It's kind of like Galaxy's Edge, but on a boat. It costs like thousands of dollars a night from what I remember, and I don't have that kind of money. But if you guys want to become a Patreon supporter and fund that, then I think every single one of you listening would have to give a bit of money, and then after several months I might be able to afford it. But I'm not genuinely asking for you guys to give me money so I can afford to go on this Galactic Star Cruise. I've just kind of accepted unless I win the lottery or come into a huge amount of money very suddenly, that's not going to be something I ever get into. What I can do is read the comic, the mini-series that is going to connect with it. So they're the kind of High Republic mini-series that are coming out over the next, I think it's over the next few months, because obviously Monster of Temple Peak, I think it's on issue 3 at the moment. I think Trail of Shadows is issue 2, and then I think The Eye of the Storm and Halcyon Legacy are going to be out early 2022. So they're kind of the connective tissue, but there's an audio drama out, which is also by Cavan Scott, busy man, and it's an audio drama called The Tempest Runner. Now, it is set after The Rising Storm, so please make sure you read The Rising Storm and then check that out. Don't do it the other way around. And it's all about Lorna D, the Twi'lek Tempest Runner, who's part of the Nile. It's a very interesting read. I wasn't going to do like a full review on it. I do like audio dramas, but it's kind of some way harder to review because, with a book, when I'm reading it, I can make a few notes here and there, and also I can kind of flick back through the book and like find parts that I'm thinking about, reread passages. But with an audio drama that's like, 6 or 7 hours long, I can't always remember where things happen in a certain way. And you can read a bit online. I think Wikipedia's got some information and like who's in it and stuff, but they don't have the full written out synopsis of the entirety of the audio drama, obviously, because that would kind of take away from the audio drama. And I don't want to buy the written script version of the audio drama. I'm not even sure if that even is out. I know that Cavan Scott's last one, Dooku Jedi Lost, and the Dr. Aphra audio book, both of those have got normal books, so I presume Tempest Runner will have a normal book out, but I don't want to buy the script of something if I've already got the audio drama of it. But it's worth a listen. It's kind of like, I think I'll describe it almost as like, it's probably the same sort of content as the miniseries or like an interlude chapter or something. I think it works well because it does push on Lorna D's story somewhat, and there is some flashbacks that are quite interesting that do connect with Marchion Ro and connect with Marchion Ro's dad, Asgar Ro, who was the Eye of the Storm before Marchion was. So you hear some of the sort of backstory with Marchion Ro and some early years of the Nile before Marchion Ro was the Eye of the Storm. So you do get some quite interesting things. So if you're intrigued by the Nile and you want more information on the Nile as antagonist, like what they're all about, I would recommend the Tempest Runner, and it does kind of further on certain elements from the Rising Storm that, as I said, I don't want to really say yet. I probably won't say in this review fully. I don't want to spoil the Tempest Runner audiobook as well. But yeah, there are elements of this book which then lead on to the Tempest Runner. And it brings some quite interesting things. There's like this whole prison ship idea that the High Republic have got, and it's meant to be about trying to rehabilitate some people who go into this. They can be reintroduced into society and all those things. And it's got some quite interesting ideas in that. I would say if you're really into audio dramas and you're really into the High Republic stuff, then yeah, check out the Tempest Runner. It is really good. But I wouldn't say it's necessarily essential. I'd say, the main Light of the Jedi and Rising Storm are 100% essential to understand the High Republic. And then I'd say like one tier down from that would be the High Republic comics, as in the standard High Republic comics, as well as probably the young adult books, Into the Dark and Out of the Shadows, and then one tier below those I'd say would be the rest of them, which is, the Tempest Runner audiobook, the 2 junior novels, and then the High Republic Adventures comics. I know earlier on I did say that I generally prefer the High Republic Adventures comics. I do enjoy them more, and the plot is very interesting, and they do connect with the other junior novels and some of the young adult, or some of the elements of the young adult novels as well. Like in Out of the Shadows, there's characters that are specifically in the High Republic Adventures comics. But although it's a lot of fun and they do connect tissue, I'm trying to think of not everyone wants to read every single piece of content that comes out of the High Republic, because there is a lot. So the kind of essentials to really understand the main elements of the plot are the adult novels in air quotes, as well as the main run of comics. So Tempest Runner, it's definitely good. It's worth a listen, but it's not like game changing. It will make you appreciate the character Lorna D more, because it's basically all about her. And then there's other characters that pop up in it as well. So as I said, with Marchion Ro and Asgar Ro and the Nile in general, you get more information on those, as well as general universal politics. You get information about Aeloth, which is one of the other places the Twi'leks come from. I know that Ryloth, I think, is like their main homeworld, so you get information about that. So there is a lot of interesting stuff in there. There's some cool things to unpack, but where I generally listen to audio dramas normally when I'm driving to and from work, I can't really make notes about it and things, hence why I don't always do a full review on the audio dramas. But yeah, they're sort of the connective content to this novel. But now I'm just going to give some broad strokes of plot. So this is going to be spoilers. So everything I've said so far is just about themes and characters and like really broad strokes of the plot. And I would say if you're intending on reading the Rising Storm, please go do that before listening to the second half of this review. I am going to do a mild amount of spoilers, mainly because there's like 1 or 2 elements that I very specifically want to mention, and I can't talk about them without spoiling something. So although you guys obviously know the Republic Fair gets attacked by the Nile, I want to give a little bit more information about those elements and some of the things that get brought up. So this is your spoiler warning. As I said, this won't spoil the whole of the Rising Storm book. There's still a lot of great things to take on board from it, and there's a lot of cool things about it. It's a really, really fun book, but if you are intending on reading it, I'd probably err on the side of caution and say, stop listening here. This next part is more so for people who either aren't going to read the High Republic novels, or it's going to be a long time before they do, and they want to know what's going on, how it connects with like the comics or other content or anything like that. Or if you guys are just generally interested in the High Republic, but you don't necessarily have intention on reading them in particular. So the main thing that I wanted to speak about was something that I alluded to earlier on in the light spoiler review, which is the Nile, specifically Marchion Ro, goes somewhere and he uncovers something, and this is some sort of threat. Now, what he calls it is the Great Leveler. I think it has multiple names, but it's basically this being that seems to feed on only Force sensitives, but kind of their life force. It kind of makes them into such a fear of shock that it either saps their life force away or it eats them, but we're not entirely sure at this moment. But basically it kills things that are Force sensitive. It specifically targets them. The concept of it is very, very interesting, and it's quite scary in a lot of ways. And Cavan Scott is excellent at writing horror. That's like one of his favorite things. And so he does it expertly in this book, because the Leveler is a horror kind of being. You don't really know what it looks like. You just know when its presence is, when it's like apparently nearby. And the first few chapters and things where that character Udi Dis, who's a Tulortai, the bird person, they come into contact with the Leveler and it doesn't end well. And then the Leveler returns towards the end. There's like, the first half of the book is preparing for the Republic Fair, and then the sort of middle of the book is the attack on the Republic Fair and why it happens, and all the kind of elements of that, and the Nile actually attacking, what tactics they used, and the Jedi who are there trying to scramble and figure out how to combat the Nile while there's just terror going on, people getting massacred, and, elements of the fair getting destroyed and all kinds of other elements. So that part of it is really interesting, but then the last few chapters is kind of this, the Republic, after dealing with the stuff that happens at the fair, then go after the Nile. And one part of the Nile decide to attack somewhere else, and then it basically goes wrong for the Nile. I'm not going to delve into explicitly why, but it goes wrong for the Nile. The Republic are ready for it, and then a part of the Nile gets destroyed by the Republic. And when that happens, Marchion Ro is nearby and he calls upon the Great Leveler again, and the book ends in a tragedy. So I won't say what happens specifically, but one of the major characters does die, and it is pretty horrendous. It's like the last page or two of the book that you find out. I think it's like the last 2 sentences is where you find out who's gone, and it's pretty horrendous. They get petrified, as in physically they turn to stone, and someone touches the face of the person who has turned to stone, and their face just crumbles inward and they just kind of turn to dust. So they're pretty dead. So this great leveler has somehow turned someone or petrified them in some way. It's very bizarre, but that's one of the things where in the comics where the Drengir are being beaten and are slowly getting forced back, and then the Nile, as this book goes on, and it's kind of mentioned as well in the Tempest Runner too, where the Nile forces are actually getting more and more diminished, and it's mentioned in Out of the Shadows as well, which obviously is set after this book, where the Nile are still causing terror somewhat, but they're kind of still hiding a little bit, and Mark Yonro's still got this plan, and he's not really explaining to anyone what the plan is, and anyone who seems to get embroiled in the plan, he seems to get killed. So he's got this great plan seemingly to do with the Leveler. We don't know if the Great Leveler is going to become the main antagonist of all of the High Republic. Is the Leveler going to be the reason why the Jedi kind of become a bit more dogmatic in things? Is it going to turn people to the dark side in some crazy ways? What is it going to do? Is it going to try and force some Jedi to shut themselves off from the Force so that they can't be affected by this thing? We don't know at the moment. As I said, there's very, very little to go on, but it's a very interesting being, something that we haven't seen in the canon of Star Wars as of yet. I say the closest things we've seen to them, and this is a bit of a stretch, but in the Clone Wars, there's the Mortis arc, which is excellent, and you've got the father, the daughter, and the son, who are all elements of the Force, and you've got, the dad is the father, he's the great balancing act, and then you've got the daughter who's purely the good, and then you've got the son who's purely the dark side, and you've kind of got a whole complex thing going around. I mean, it's a 2 or 3, I think it's a 3-part arc in the Clone Wars, it might even be 4. So it's quite a chunky arc, and it kind of goes into the depths of the Force, which I found very intriguing. And the Leveler is kind of the antithesis of that, so it's kind of a destroyer of the Force. So it's a very interesting concept, and I think in the next phase of the High Republic for January 2022, it's probably going to be a lot more of a heavy connection to those things. So when I was reading that was something that really intrigued me. I'm hoping that it is in something outside of the books, because I really like seeing things, I want to see it in the comics and stuff. I have a feeling it might stick to the books, because if it appears in the comics, it might diminish its fear. Because one thing with horror that I know is that a lot of the scariest types of horror are things that you can't fully see, things that you can't fully comprehend. Everyone gets this. When you see a horror film, unless the point of the horror film is the thing is chasing you or the thing is going to get you, generally speaking, when you get it, is the scariest part is knowing that something is pursuing you, but you don't know what it is, you don't know how to kill it, you don't know really anything about it. And I assume we're going to find out more about this being as it goes on, and I assume it'll eventually get killed, because it's not around in the prequels, unless it goes into some sort of hibernation state and then it comes back, and then it's one of the main baddies for post episode 9 content, but I would find that to be quite unlikely. But with horror, you don't want to be able to see the thing, because certain people are going to find things scary and certain people aren't, and if people find something not scary and get to see it, then it takes away from the horror of it. So although there is that part of me that really wants to see what the Great Leveler looks like, and I think there's some concept art online that kind of alludes to what it is, and I think you get a very, very limited amount of description in the Rising Storm, but part of me wants to see it in comics, but part of me kind of wants it to stay in the books to keep its sort of mystery around it. But that's one element I want to tackle. The other element I wanted to tackle specifically was about Elzar Mann. So I said earlier that he kind of flits in the dark side and things. And one element I like this in Star Wars, because we don't get it very much, which is when sex comes up. Sex is obviously something that is adult, generally. People who are, teenagers inevitably get up to it, but generally speaking, it's quite an adult theme. It's something that adults generally have a better understanding of than especially teenagers. And because Star Wars centers around the Jedi, who are obviously essentially monks, they're religious individuals. They haven't got any strict doctrine that they specifically adhere to. Obviously, the doctrine you see in The Last Jedi is, I think, the first doctrine we saw in canon, really. I know in Legends there's a lot of sort of doctrine, and there's quite a few books. There's the Sith, there's the Book of the Sith, and then the Jedi Way and the Bounty Hunter Code and things, which are Legends books that I've got a couple of. But in the canon, there's not like a specific guide to the Force like there is in modern day religion, where you've got, Christianity, you've got the Bible. With Islam, you've got the Quran. Like, there's lots of doctrine and documents that connect with the religion, whereas in Star Wars with the Jedi in the current canon, we don't really have that. And although we don't have that, sex isn't really a part of what a Jedi's meant to be, from what we understand, especially the prequel era Jedi. You've got the character Rael Averross, who is one of my favourite characters, and he's a Jedi. He is in the Master and Apprentice book by Claudia Gray, which is probably my favourite Star Wars book outside of the High Republic stuff. And then we've also got, he appears in Dooku Jedi Lost, which is Cavan Scott's audio drama about, Dooku as a character, his kind of history, how he kind of got to where he is, some of the backstory of him. And Rael Averross is mentioned in that because Rael was Dooku's first apprentice, and then after Rael became a fully fledged Jedi, then Qui-Gon became the apprentice. And Rael Averross in Master and Apprentice does have sex. I actually mentioned that in my Master and Apprentice book review as well, in fact, which was about a year ago now, I think. But if you're on YouTube, if that's where you're listening, you can find it in the playlist. If not, just type in Star Wars Comics in Canon, Master and Apprentice, and it will come up wherever you're listening to this, if it's a podcast app. But Rael Averross was the first Jedi I came across who actually talked about sex and actually had it. And then in this, Elzar Mann actually has sex. And it's quite clever. You think he's not going to, and then he does. And it's quite funny seeing how he kind of somewhat tortures himself from having this. Whereas in, most occupants in the galaxy, sex and physical intimacy and things with other beings is fairly standard. As long as it's, consensual and things, people have sex because, the galaxy has to repopulate. So when you have non-Jedi characters, they actually sometimes ask Jedi about these things. Like I remember in Into the Dark, the Claudia Gray young adult novel, there's one of the main characters, Reath Silas, and he talks to a character called Nan, who's just a young girl, and she asks him about sex and he gets a little bit embarrassed about it, and then it kind of gets glazed over. But it's funny that obviously one of Anakin's thing he says in the prequels is, you're not meant to have attachments, you're not meant to have this, but equally, your love for others and your sort of the love for your fellow being is meant to kind of help you in the Force, but you're not meant to have attachments. And obviously he does kind of interpret it in a slightly different way, but in this era, it seems like the Jedi are a little bit more accepting, because one of Elzar Mann's friends, so Stellan Gios, finds out that Elzar Mann had sex, I'm pretty certain, and then he's just not really that fazed by it in a sense. It doesn't seem to be the big problem that one would assume it is, and how Anakin especially acted about it in the prequels. But it's just very interesting having someone who, Elzar Mann, his Jedi Master, and he's been with the Jedi for, he's older, he's very well respected. I think he's like mid-30s to late 30s, I think, from what I can gather, and a lot of his sort of colleagues look up to him and things, and he's got a lot of talent in the Force, but obviously some stuff happens and he kind of loses his way a little bit, and then he ends up having sex, and then it's kind of how he feels afterwards and what's going on. And another element that connects to that is that then he basically channels the dark side at one point to do something to kill a huge amount of Nihil. And I really like it when you get a character who kind of unhinges a bit and goes a bit mental, and especially with Jedi who tap into the dark side, I find that a very intriguing element of things. Darth Revan from Legends continuity is especially interesting as like a case study in some ways, because, someone who is a Jedi and then he fell to the dark side and then he loses his memory and then by default kind of becomes a light side user again and then gets his memory back. And then from what I recall, I know Knights of the Old Republic and stuff, it's kind of what you decide to do affects how the outcome of the game is. But I'm fairly certain that in the books and things, it kind of alludes to Revan then at the end kind of being a good person in general, but he's more of like a grey Jedi because he kind of utilizes powers from both. I know that that's what Starkiller does, who's like my favorite Legends character from the Force Unleashed games, where he's bad and then he becomes good, but even when he's good, he still uses dark side abilities, even though he's still trying to do good things. So I quite like that element of things, and where Elzar Mann kind of taps into the dark side of the Force, I'm kind of hoping that happens again and he becomes a bit less stable, because it's just such an interesting thing to see a character do. So I really like that element of it, and when he does that, it actually, it kills a certain amount of Nihil, and it does something that saves the lives of other people. And it is that forever debate in Star Wars, which is, you have to save people under the right guise. You have to do it for the right reasons. I think Rose says it in The Last Jedi, you should basically save the ones we love, not kill the ones we hate. Whereas I don't fully agree with that, to be honest with you. If, not to get into a big political thing, but sometimes there are certain times, I think, where not necessarily that violence is the answer, but, if someone came into my house, had a knife to Megan's throat and I was holding a gun, then I would shoot them. I don't want to kill someone, but if it's between losing someone who means so much to me and taking a life, I'm obviously going to take a life. It's not, obviously that scenario is very easy to understand and very non-complex, and anything aside from extreme examples is very complicated, but that's what I quite like. I like the less it being just moral absolutism, like it happens in certain Marvel movies and things like that as well. I know Batman's got a very similar sort of mindset, or most iterations of Batman have got a similar mindset, which is you don't kill, you just never kill, under any circumstance, unless it's, a really bad accident or something, or if the plot needs it. But I want to see more characters in the future High Republic stuff tapping into the dark side a bit more, and then maybe that's one of the reasons why the modern era Jedi from the prequels are more dogmatic with things. So yeah, I just want to kind of talk about those two elements specifically. As I said, I've spoken about the Great Leveler, I've spoken about some of the Nile stuff and the general plot and things, but I don't want to talk anymore because this isn't going to be, me just telling you the whole plot of The Rising Storm, because I would be here for hours. It's a chunky book, but I really, really enjoyed the book. I thought it was excellent. I thought it was really, really worth a read. And if you're listening to this part, even though I said earlier, maybe don't listen to the spoilery stuff if you're going to read it one day, I really do recommend reading Light of the Jedi and The Rising Storm. They are two of the best pieces of Star Wars content I've consumed in a long time. I've read all the comics, and the comics are great. I always got about the 2017 Darth Vader comics, like my favourite, but that really strikes a chord with me because I actually do like the prequels and things, and it connects with them quite well and adds a lot of depth to Darth Vader, and you get to see lightsaber bleeding, and you get to see his like Force vision at the end, and I like things to do with the Force. I really like getting into that, and one of the things I love about the High Republic is everyone's connected to the Force, and it allows the Jedi to be their own person. They all sense the Force in different ways. Now, I think I said this in my Light of the Jedi review, where someone hears it as a song, someone sees it as like an ocean, someone sees it like a fire, someone kind of feels it like the wind. Like everyone interprets the Force in a different way, and that's kind of how humans in real life interpret what life is. Some people believe it's a god, some people believe it's many gods, some people believe there is no god, some people believe it's just kind of universal energy. There's loads of different ways of people, although the interpretation is generally the same for a lot of them, which is there's some sort of higher power, be it a deity or something conscious, or just the unconscious energy of the universe, or that there's nothing above us and there's just living things and nothing else. All the things, aside from that last example, are similar in essence. They're generally just there's a higher power. And obviously with the Jedi, they all believe in the Force, and they all tap into it, and they all have certain specialities, but everyone kind of views it and interprets it in a different way. And I really like the individuality that the High Republic Jedi get, that the prequel era Jedi didn't get. And obviously that's part of the point of the High Republic, being able to expand those horizons. So I'm very excited to see where the High Republic goes, but it also makes me very excited to see when we go back several hundred more years. And I would like to see in canon like a cohesive, be it a film or some books or comics or whatever. It's probably going to be a film, maybe a series, maybe a book. I'd be very surprised if the first time they tap into really old, hundreds of years before the High Republic, the first thing is going to be comics. I'd find that very, very surprising. But I really want to hear about and see, some of the start of the Jedi and how the Jedi Order got founded, and some of the Jedi-Sith Wars and how we got to where we are. But I don't want to necessarily... I've read a bit of Legends stuff, but I don't want to necessarily delve into Legends. I want the canon to do it so it connects to everything else, because obviously there's no such thing as the High Republic in Legends. But yeah, rambly way of saying, really, really enjoyed this book. Love where they're going. And although this book is, I'd say, as good as Light of the Jedi, it still feels very different. And it's kind of what I like. It's almost with other directors. It's kind of what I compare with The Force Awakens and The Last Jedi, in a sense. Although The Rising Storm and Light of the Jedi are far more similar than The Force Awakens and Last Jedi are, The Last Jedi and The Force Awakens, for me, are both equally good films, just in very different ways. And I like how J.J. Abrams and Rian Johnson both interpret Star Wars and create content in different ways, and it's kind of how Charles Soule and Cavan Scott are taking it, although theirs is much more cohesive, it's much more connected, it's much more clearly they worked together to make a big plot, as opposed to one of them made a film, and then the second one also made a film, and then the first guy made another film that kind of retconned a lot of stuff. A bit of a up and down experience for the sequel trilogy in certain ways. But I like Cavan Scott's writing, and I like Charles Soule's writing, and although it feels different, the universe itself that it is in doesn't feel disjointed in any way by that. It's just good to have other content made by other people while still having a really, really good story to tell. So yeah, I really enjoyed The Rising Storm. Thought it was absolutely excellent. I really, really can't wait for the third book, and I think that's called The Fallen Star or Fallen Stars, and that's going to be written by Claudia Gray. So the third book, so we've got 3 pillar big adult novels, each written by a different author, and I'm very, very excited to see where that goes, and I have a strong feeling that a lot of the characters we really like are going to die, which is going to cause me a great amount of upset because we've already had a couple characters die in both The Light of the Jedi and also The Rising Storm, one of which was incredibly devastating, and I had a sense it was coming, and I really didn't want it to. And that last page, that's where it happened, which is so sad. But really hope you guys enjoyed it. Please let me know what you thought of my book review. I'm always open to hear some opinions and some ways I could make this better. Obviously, certain points I just ramble on, but a lot of you guys seem to like it when I just go off the cuff and don't go on my notes and just waffle. Obviously, book reviews are slightly less structured than my comic episodes are and things. But, if you've read this book, please tell me what you thought. I'd be really, really interested to hear how people thought. I know a few of you guys picked up The Light of the Jedi after my Light of the Jedi book review, and I heard a few of you guys talking about how much you enjoyed that. Either you read the physical version or you listened to the audio version. So either or, however you want to consume the media. I personally prefer reading these. I'm a bit more of a visual person, so I like to be able to go over stuff. And obviously when I'm making notes, it's a bit easier, as well as when I'm looking up stuff. If you know how a character's name is spelt, it's generally a bit easier to find out more information on the character rather than have to try and write it out phonetically for a name that doesn't exist in standard English that is created for Star Wars. It can be hard to figure out whether the spelling's correct or not. But yeah, let me know what you thought of The Rising Storm. Let me know how you thought it compared to Light of the Jedi. If you haven't read it, but you've listened to the entirety of this, let me know, has it made you want to read it? Or are you just happy cruising along, just listening to my reviews of all these things and getting like peripheral understanding and knowledge of the High Republic? I'd be really interested to hear what you guys sort of think about this, how it compared to the other one. I'm talking about the books, not the review. And let me know if you're excited about any of these sort of upcoming series, because obviously with Trail of Shadows and Monster of Temple Peak and Eye of the Storm and Halcyon Legacy coming out, I think because they started... Monster on Temple Peak, I think, started a month before Trail of Shadows, and then the other two have not yet started. So I think that when we get to the new year and I've caught up with, I've surpassed the War of the Bounty Hunter stuff, and I should be up to date with all the ongoing series, and I can start tackling, the High Republic comics and whatnot, I'll be able to do one mini-series a month, and that'll be whichever one's just finished, I presume. So let me know if you're excited for any of those. Let me know if you're excited about, it's Claudia Gray, because obviously I've tackled quite a lot of her stuff, and obviously I interviewed her December 2020 on this show. And what do you guys think? Are you excited for the next phase? What do you want to see from the High Republic? Just let me know what you think. Contact me on social media or contact the guys in Comics in Motion. The message will get passed to me at some point. But yeah, follow me at Genuine Chit-Chat on Instagram, Twitter, and on Facebook. Please, if you haven't already, if you're on YouTube, do it now, please. Subscribe. If you're not on YouTube, please go over to Genuine Chit-Chat's YouTube channel, because if I can get 100 subscribers, then I get to change the channel link to youtube.com/genuine chit-chat rather than being a gobbledygook of 100 letters and characters and things. And so I know not all of you listen on YouTube. In fact, quite a small amount of people listen on YouTube. But if you're listening on a podcast app and you have a YouTube account, please go over there and just subscribe. It'll really, really help me out, and I would appreciate that greatly. You can also support the show by going to patreon.com/genuine chit-chat. You can subscribe for as little as £1 a month. I've seen a couple of new people recently, so thank you very much for those. And basically you get access to the audio feed, which has, it's an RSS link. You can either listen on Patreon itself, either get the app and listen from there, or go on the desktop version, just type it in and you can listen there, or you can copy the link that you get as soon as you become a supporter. You get a little welcome message from me and it's got the link in there. And if you put that link into where you listen to podcasts like Podcast Addict and Overcast and places like that, you put the link in there and then you just get access to the Patreon feed. You'll know you get it because the logo is the same as the normal feed logo, except Genuine is written in gold and not in silver, which I was very chuffed about when I thought of that. I thought it looks really cool, but that's just me nerding out to my own graphic design ability of just tweaking a color. But yeah, you get access to a whole new feed and you get access to at least one episode of Afterthoughts every week. It's normally one per standard, but then when there's a two-parter released of Genuine Chit-Chat, when part 2 drops on the normal feed, all the patrons then get an extra Afterthoughts on the Sunday. So even if you become a Patreon supporter, you'll still get content every Sunday. It will either be on the standard Genuine Chit-Chat feed, or it'll be on the Patreon feed. I generally release afterthoughts like middle of the week as well. Me and Megan have been watching series, which we do spoiler-free reviews of. We're watching a lot of films at the cinema soon. We've got, this week, we're watching Venom, Let There Be Carnage, Harry Potter and the Philosopher's Stone, because it's the 20th year anniversary, and you guys, if any of you know me and Megan, you know Megan's as into Harry Potter as I am with Star Wars. And then we're watching, I think, Last Night in Soho on Sunday. So in a week, we're going to the cinema 3 times. And then I think we're going to go see Dune the week after that. And I think the week after that is when Eternals comes out. So lots of stuff to watch. All the stuff at the cinema we watch, we do spoiler-free reviews of. And then any of the older films we watch, like we recently watched the Halloween movies, like a whole bunch of them. So we did a review for 1, 2, and 3. We're due to record a review of H2O and the 2018 Halloween film as well. And we've got a few other films that we've watched recently. We did an X-Men rewatch, and we've recorded our review of X-Men 1, 2, and 3. We haven't yet recorded for the Wolverine trilogy or the First Class and Days of Future Past things. I might show Megan Apocalypse as well, do a nice little trilogy there too. We're yet to watch the New Mutants. We've done all the Star Wars films apart from Last Jedi and The Rise of Skywalker, because, you know, me and Megan have got a lot of things going on in life, as well as my 2 podcasts and everything else, and we don't have the time to be able to record an Afterthoughts every day, because we did at one point, and then we basically had like 15 Afterthoughts all recorded in the space of like 2 weeks, and I didn't have to record any for ages. And then there was one Afterthoughts episode, and then the next one was, the recording difference times was like 2.5-3 months difference between them, even though they were released like a week apart. But anyway, if you want access to loads of additional content, as well as supporting the show, both Star Wars Comics and Canon and Genuine Chit-Chat, and this book review, if you're listening to it now, you're either already listening on Patreon or you're listening on the main feed. But I often will release these book reviews on Patreon a few days early as well, because I normally get them edited and finished early too. So if you want loads of access to, if you want early access to a lot of my content, as well as having hours of bonus content, as well as being able to support the show or both shows, then, and you've got a spare, I think including tax and whatever, I think it's like £1.20, which I think in dollars is less than $2 a month. If you're willing to contribute that amount of money, just so you get all this extra content and things and support the show, it means the absolute world to me. If you don't want to contribute financially, you can contribute in many other ways. You can share stuff on social media, and you can choose to tag at Genuine Chit-Chat into it if you want, or you don't have to tag me if you're just sharing with other people and sending links, that sort of stuff. That's perfectly fine too. But if you want to really support the show and do a little bit of extra effort with no financial burden attached, please rate and review on Apple Podcasts or Podmatch or Good Pods or anywhere like that. Spread the word. The more reviews and the more people talking about the shows, the more buzz that both the feed of Comics in Motion gets, Star Wars Comics and Canon gets, and Genuine Chit-Chat get, then it just means everyone wins, really. So you get more content and more people listening to the shows that you love, and then they can do more crazy cool things with that too. So I really hope you guys enjoyed this. I'll be doing my next book review, which will be for Race to Crashpoint Tower. I'm excited to talk about that, actually. It was a really cool book, and it ties in very, very nicely with The Rising Storm, because it happens at the exact same time. So there's events that happen in The Rising Storm that you kind of see happen in Race to Crashpoint Tower, and there's quite a few cool things, and actually the characters in Race to Crashpoint Tower do very briefly get mentioned in The Rising Storm, because the plot of the Race to Crashpoint Tower has an impact on the outcome of The Rising Storm. So very cool. Excited to do that. That'll probably be about a month or so. As of recording this at the moment, I'm recording it towards the end of October. So I've got the Vader's Castle thing that will be released on day before Halloween. Then I think the week after that's going to be War of the Bounty Hunters. So the week after that. So you guys are probably going to be listening to this the second week in November. We shall see. I need to edit it all first, which will take a little while. But yeah, hope you guys enjoyed this as much as I did. Obviously, I love reading Star Wars books and telling you guys all about it. As I said, do all the things I just mentioned. Subscribe on Patreon. Give me money, please. Review on everywhere, Podmatch, Good Pod, and Apple Podcast, and subscribe to Genuine Chit-Chat onto YouTube as well, and also tell everyone you've ever met about Genuine Chit-Chat and Star Wars Comics and Canon, and just share it all the time over all your social medias. Just become a shill for me and my content, please. But anyway, guys, I do really appreciate you guys listening. Thank you so much, as always. I'll talk to you, I imagine, next week, because I think I've probably released this on a Saturday on the main feed. So if I've released it on Patreon, thanks for listening, guys. Thanks for supporting the show. And if you're listening on the normal feed, I will talk to you next week. So as always, guys, may the Force be with you. The intro for Star Wars Comics and Canon is arranged by myself, Mike Burton, and the backing music was made by Eric Matias of soundimage.org.
You have just experienced host, creator, everything elser of Genuine Chit-Chat, and also the host and creator of Star Wars Comics in Canon, found on the Comics in Motion podcast, Mike Burton.